What up, world? It's your boy Mark Walter Ward, Super Facts Show, Super Facts Network. Today we got with us Shawn Setaro, who just recently published or is about to release a book about 6ix 9ine called Dummy Boy, but we're going to talk about his career. So you were a reporter at Complex when you got embroiled, I guess embroiled would be a good word for it, in the whole 6ix 9ine situation. But how did you get into writing to begin with?
Sure. Hey, Mark, thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, no doubt.
So I was a musician for a very long time. I'd, grown up writing high school newspaper, a little bit in college, all that kind of stuff, but I kind of put it to the side for a long time, trying to make it as a musician, playing in bands, doing session work, all that kind of stuff. And in, I guess it was 2009, I came across a website that was then called Rap Exegesis, later renamed Rap Genius because no one knew what the word exegesis meant.
Right.
But it was kind of like, someone had taken my brain and put it on the internet, in that I always thought of the interconnections between rap songs. Jay-Z references this Snoop Dogg song, which in turn references the DOC song, which in turn is, sampling an old Cool Mo D song or whatever, right? Like all these interconnections, to take just one example. And so to see that on the internet was wild. So I started doing that as a hobby. And then a couple of years in, all of a sudden it became a job. And, that was kind of the beginning. From there, once I had left there in 2014, freelanced for a while, was a contributor at Forbes, and then, started up a Complex and kind of worked my way up the ranks there.
How did you get your first article published?
So the way things worked at Rap Genius or Genius is, when we started, some of the guys had an idea that it would be good for us to publish articles at other outlets under the Rap Genius brand.
Gotcha.
And
smart.
Because it was such a small group of people, and I expressed interest, I got to do it. So that's how I got bylines. I'd written stuff before, like I said, college newspaper and written for zines while I was in college. But this sort of first burst of things at Genius allowed me to really get my feet wet writing for a ton of other outlets because of these partnerships. I'd have something in The Source or The Atlantic or whatever, and it enabled me, or Vibe, and it enabled me to get a lot of bylines really quickly about a wide variety of topics.
Hey, that word you said, do you spell it EXOGESIS?
EXEGESIS.
And how do you say it?
Exegesis.
All right, so I'm gonna tell you a problem that I've had during my life, and I've embarrassed myself several times. I've always been a voracious reader, but I grew up in the DC area during crack, and a lot of times the language I saw in books wasn't quite what I saw, or quite what I heard in the real world. And every now and then I would try to use a word and mispronounce it to my embarrassment. And I'd seen that word many times, and I'd never known how to say it.
Yeah, I mean, look, but
I did actually know what it meant, though. I did know what it meant.
Yeah. Well, you have a leg up on a lot of even us in the early days who were working on the site. A lot of us had to look it up. I had the highest SAT score in federal prison, brother, 1370. Very nice.
Yeah, I guess.
Very nice.
I guess. So what did you write about at Forbes?
So for Forbes, basically, I was, wasn't on staff there. It's what they called a contributor, which meant I could publish stuff on the website. And the people there, the editors there, were great. And they kind of just let me find my own lane. They used to joke that as long as I put a $sign in the headline, I could write about whatever I wanted. So I ended up writing about a lot of different music business things. And actually, something I started at Genius and continued afterwards was a podcast called came to be called the Cipher. And that was a podcast where I would conduct in-depth interviews with, all sorts of hip hop figures, whether it be rappers, of course, but producers, writers, dancers, photographers, authors, anybody who I thought was interesting and I could get to talk to me for an hour.
What was the best episode?
I mean, we did like 250, so there are a lot, but certainly,
there must be one that comes to mind as soon as I said that.
I mean, look, Ice-T was amazing, if only because we got to go to his house. And so my producer and I got to go to his place and, you know, sit in his kitchen and talk to him. And that was pretty amazing. You know, I would say certainly, you know, I don't want to get into a list of them, but we have talked to some people who have since passed on. And so that is memorable for, you know, other ways. Like we talked to, you know, Sean Price and TC Islam and Fred the Godson, just to name a few. And those obviously, you know, in retrospect became, you know, very memorable.
Yeah, I've had some experiences like that. I know exactly what you mean. So then when you're working for Complex and you start covering 6ix 9ine, at what point do you realize that this is going to be something more than a series of articles, that, you know, you're going to do a podcast narrated by Angie Martinez, and then eventually you're going to write the Dummy Boy book? It was all so
I don't even really know how to describe the situation. It was all sort of so gradual. Basically, I explained in sort of the very beginning of the book how it all started, which is like, you know, I was a music writer at Complex and we were struggling and trying to figure out how do we cover this whole SoundCloud rap wave. Remember, this was like early mid 2018. So, you know, a lot of these guys didn't really need press, right? They could turn on their phones and talk to millions of people. So why would they, you know, subject themselves to an interview where they don't have control over how it turns out, right? So we were trying to figure that stuff out. Tekashi was obviously hot. And I just started looking into people around him and doing some research on that. And in the middle of that process, everyone got arrested. So I just, you know, I was like, well, I think it was, you know, one of my coworkers was like, well, why don't you go to court and see what you can find out? And so it's funny because the first day I went to court, I didn't know what I was doing. I actually showed up at the right courthouse, but on the wrong day. And so I was sitting in this courtroom for like 30 minutes being like, why are they talking about, you know, how some guy stole from a Whole Foods? Like what, you know, what's going on here? Right. But I eventually, you know, course corrected. And basically it just started out with me reporting the court stuff. And I found it pretty fascinating and just kind of kept going back to hearings more and more. Every time they had a hearing, you know, I'd go back and report on it. And at a certain point, you know, me and my partner on the podcast, Shiva Bayat, you know, we were deciding, okay, well, we want to do a narrative podcast, right? Something that isn't a show where people sit down and talk every week. We want to tell a story.
Gotcha.
And Tekashi came to mind and we got a sort of tentative approval for it. And just sort of, before we had a budget, before we had anything, just, you know, started interviewing people for it. And so the case kind of became my life for a number of years. Like I'd, you know, report on the case and then also simultaneously be interviewing people for the podcast and, you know, digging up the whole story that way. And it started to become a book actually during the trial is when I first got in touch with the guy who then became my agent, William Laturco. He was like, I think you can write a book. And that just sounded scary. Right, like something my fancy writer friends do, but I couldn't possibly. But I figured, you know what? No one knows this story better than me and someone's going to do it. So I'll be mad if it's not me. So that sort of started the whole process that culminated in the book Dummy Boy.
So how hard was it for you?
Yeah, there you go. There it is. There it is. There's the cover. It was a very challenging thing, but I sort of tricked myself into doing it. And what I mean by that is I wrote a first draft, but I didn't tell myself this is the first draft of your first book, right? I just said, let me look at all the information again and let me write down everything that happened start to finish. I won't consider it a draft. I'll just consider it, you know, getting all the information out, telling the story, you know, front to back. And once I have that down, we can see what happens with the book. Well, and, you know, and a lot of that first draft actually ended up in the final product.
You know, when they go watch the episode where we talk about the book, I know a lot of the behind the scenes information on this. I met several of the key figures. So, well, actually, I've never met anybody affiliated with 6ix 9ine, but I just want to say that I truly understand how complex the range of things you were dealing with, from like legalese in the court documents to the trying to figure out, you know, decoding the language and the social media posts. And I think you just did an outstanding job of boiling it down to an easy to read narrative without sacrificing any detail, or, you know, the writing is compelling but not too dense. I mean, I just think it's outstanding. I didn't realize that you were involved in the podcast series, and I had listened to that, and that as well was outstanding. And if you were writing the words that Angie Martinez was saying, then I mean, salute to you, brother. But I'm curious, is this going to be a one-on-one, or do you plan on writing more books?
Okay, well, thank you. First off, I had the most amazing editors for the Tekashi series. You know, in particular, Catherine St. Louis, who is just a beast of an editor. So it was my first time writing for the ear rather than the eye. And so it was great to have, you know, just great guidance through.
Everybody should go listen to that. It was one of the best produced podcasts I've ever heard. And I've listened to many, like you said, ones of not just people talking, where they tell stories.
Thank you. Yeah, we're very proud of that. It's infamous, the Tekashi 6ix 9ine story. You can find it on Spotify. Yeah, we're everyone involved in that. Me, Shiva, Catherine, our Ann Hepperman, our producer, like all of us. It was a small team, but we worked super hard on it for a long time, and we're all really proud of it. And, you know, working with Angie was just amazing. You know, like hearing her read scripts that we'd worked on was, you know, like that voice, you know, and she's sitting right there in front of you doing it. And it's, you know, it's your job to be like, no, you know, say that again, or whatever. It was incredible. Yeah, you know, it was a really great experience to do. Yeah, and I'm sorry, you asked something else. I got sidetracked talking about the podcast.
It's all good. I got a problem with that, man. I'm learning my craft as we speak. I interrupt too much and I stutter, but I'm gonna get there. Do you plan on writing another book?
Oh, of course, yes. So yes, I'm actually working on another book now. I just finished a very rough first draft of it, and I don't want to get too much into what it's about, but I'll say that, you know, one thing was unique about Tekashi's case, or one thing stood out to me, which is that, you know, there are a lot of problems with the criminal justice system, as I'm sure you know. This case didn't really reflect that many of them, right? Like all of the people involved all did what they either pled out to, or in a couple of cases were found guilty of. The judge was, I think I try to get this across in the book, you know, I had some disagreements with him, but overall I thought he did a good job. And when it came time to sentence people, he really tried to take into account sort of what they had done and how deeply involved they were, and sentence people, you know, very thoughtfully. I don't think federal prison necessarily should exist in the first place, but if you're taking that as a thing that's in the world, I think he was pretty thoughtful about like how much time each person got. But there are a lot of cases that aren't like that. And there are a lot of cases that involve rap and rap music and rappers that aren't like that.
Shout out Derek Parker.
Yeah. So I am looking closely at that history and how that plays out in the present day. This sort of like, you know, cases involving, you know, this sort of long history of rap and the police. And I feel in some ways it's, you know, the other side of the story to this book.
I agree. I mean, the symbiotic nature of it, you know, they can be adversarial, but at the same time, they're hiring police for security.
Yeah, certainly. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned Derek,
you could probably write, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you could probably write a whole book about cops turning their head when they're hired by rappers from crimes.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we've seen that plenty. But yeah, you mentioned Derek Parker. For your listeners who don't know, Derek Parker is a former NYPD detective who, you know, started what is now called the Enterprise Operations Unit, basically the hip hop police. You know, at first it was a one-man show, and then a few people, and now it's like it's sort of a whole thing where the NYPD shunts off Black detectives they don't want to promote. They throw them in the rap unit now. A bunch of black detectives
Figures, huh?
filed suit over that, filed a big complaint over it not too long ago. So yeah, there's a very long and scary and interesting history there that I'm looking at.
Oh, that sounds hella interesting. If you ever get a wild hair up your ass, look into the Doe B death. There's some irregularities there that I think probably involve the police, but I haven't had the basically, you know, writing long-term stories, you need some financing. So, but yeah, there's some stuff there. So I'd like to finish this with this. What advice would you give somebody who wants to break into the music journalism?
Sure. So
and I'm sorry, and is a degree necessary?
Okay, first thing I would say, no, a degree is not necessary. I, you know, have an undergraduate degree, but it's from a music school. You know, certainly I took one journalism class while I was there, but no one certainly ever asked me about it. You know, if you have to obviously read and write and know the area and know the sort of lay of the land and what the, you know, what who the different players are and who the writers are, and, you know, just read and write and be curious. But my biggest advice is to follow your curiosity. So what I mean by that is, like, when you don't have to work, right? What are you doing? What's the thing you're thinking about? What's the thing you're texting your friends about? What's the thing you're arguing about? You know, what do you spend your time doing? And there's a clue in there somewhere. It might not be one-to-one, you know, you might not necessarily get a job doing the exact thing that you do in your off time, but there's some kind of clue in there about your interests, your facility, what drives you. And so that's what I mean by follow your curiosity.
Those are wise words. I truly believe that however you want to phrase it, God, the universe, life tells you what to do, and too many people don't listen.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead.
No, that's it. I mean, just, you know, I saw that in that, like, years before I discovered the site Rap Genius, I was like typing out the lyrics to rap albums and annotating them, like putting in little footnotes to explain them. And then, you know, this website comes along that literally does that. And, you know, so I was sort of perfectly suited for it, even though I didn't realize it. I was kind of preparing myself for this future job.
I know what you mean. You know, I found whatever success I found, I was reading the liner notes on CDs, not with any intent of having a future out of it. You know what I mean? So I can totally relate. So yeah, I agree. Look for your passion and write about that. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Shawn Setaro on his writing career. Setaro, excuse me, on his writing career. And y'all make sure you go out and get Dummy Boy and whatever next books he does, which sounds like it's going to be dumb fascinating. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Mark. Pleasure to be here.
No doubt. Oh, I'm sorry. And of course, y'all can get Dummy Boy when it's released at Amazon or your local bookstore.
Yeah, pre-order it now, and it'll be published on December 21st, but available for pre-order now anywhere you get books.